So, my name is Matt Rosenblum. I live in Hazel Park, Michigan with my girlfriend Natalie and our pug Monique. Um, I haven't, because of the nature of my illness, I haven't had a job in like 3 years. But in a former life, I was finishing a PhD. I was going to be an academic. The thing about pancreatic cancer is that you know, probably the most popular narrative surrounding the disease is that it is not only very lethal, but very difficult to diagnose. And there are a number of reasons why it's very difficult to diagnose. The pancreas is all the way in the, deep in the body, and the symptoms are very nuanced. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was 25. I've never had an unproblematic stomach, so gastrointestinal distress. Some of the more perceptible symptoms of pancreatic cancer, they were just kind of par for the course. For me, I'm not a stranger to eating something, having heartburn, or something like that. In general, they're not. Even if I hadn't had Crohn's disease, I probably wouldn't have noticed them. I lost some weight over the months, but it wasn't until I guess it was late January of 2021, when I really started to experience symptoms that I noticed. And it really is a stark distinction. The earlier symptoms are very nuanced, can go unnoticed, can also go misdiagnosed as a multitude of other things, gallstones, whatever, other kinds of cancer. Um, and there's such a stark difference between that and when you really get the symptoms. And conventional wisdom is that by the time you're experiencing the symptoms you notice, generally speaking, the cancer has spread outside of the pancreas, which means that by the time you have these crazy symptoms, which I'll describe in a second, it's basically, I don't want to say it's too late, but that is, that's what conventional wisdom is. So it was late January of 2021. I had really dark urine. My stool was like bone white, like the wall behind me white. And at first, it was COVID. It was COVID. I had lost my job. I had moved to a strange city as a place to land, to help my friend with his business. And then his business closed down, and he moved away. And I was alone when this started happening. So at first, I thought I was hungover, honestly. And I had had a few beers the night before, and I just went to the gas station, got some Gatorade, laid in bed, drank my Gatorade, and the urine did not get lighter. I didn't even, notice the stool color for a while, until really my skin started to itch. That is, the bathroom symptoms. They're pretty jarring. Just to see urine that dark and poop that pale. But the itching was probably the worst. And it was, my skin itched. It was the bottoms of my hands and the bottoms of my feet. And it was somehow the itching symptoms are related to your circadian rhythms. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. But it is true that the itching was worst at night. So when you're trying to sleep, your hands, the bottoms of your hands and the bottoms of your feet are itching so, excruciatingly that I'd never felt anything like it before. And it's a hard place to scratch. Finally, after a night of this, I took my hands and my feet and I would hold them under the tub, under the spigot, as hot as it would go, and I would just leave my hands and feet under there to scald the flesh and numb the sensation, because it's the middle of the night. You're itching on your hands and feet for seemingly no reason. You know, it's jarring. It's jarring in retrospect to think about like burning my hands and feet to alleviate the pain, but it was that significant. And I know not everyone gets the itchiness, and I think there seems to be some kind of controversy about the itchiness, because not every pancreatic cancer awareness campaign includes the itchiness. I don't know. I definitely experienced it, and it was horrible. So when something started to happen that I knew was like, whoa, I've never itched uncontrollably before, I kind of sat on it for I don't know, 48 hours. Not the most responsible, but in retrospect, I really, not that bad at all. And yeah, it was about 2 or 3 days, I can't remember. And I was in a long distance relationship at this point with a woman I knew from graduate school. And I told her, and she was like, yeah, you should go to the doctor. And sort of intuitive, but for someone with such, anxiety about doctors and hospitals, and I needed someone to actually tell me. In any case, I had just moved to Durham, and I hadn't gotten a new, I didn't even have health insurance at this point. So I went to an urgent care in Durham, North Carolina, and I'll never forget this interaction. I'm pretty terrified. And the nurse practitioner, and I love nurses and nurse practitioners, they are the best. And navigating a very serious illness with oncologists alone would be crazy, because it's like, sometimes your oncologist is like, they're raised in a cage by, they've never met people before. They're a little sciency sometimes. And nurses, I think, just contribute such a humanistic element to your care. But in this moment, I was irritated because I remember so we get my blood results back, and my bilirubin is really high. That is I think it's an enzyme that is produced by your liver, and she was like, when your bilirubin is high, you start to get jaundiced. And she very like out loud is having this dialogue with herself while she's shining a bright light in my eyes about whether or not my eyes are yellowing or not. And then finally she looks at me, she's like, do you think your eyes are yellow? And I was like, honestly, you have a flashlight in my eyes. I have no idea. Um, and we get some more tests back. And at one point, she was like, because I joked that I thought it was a hangover. And when you make a joke like that and you have symptoms like this, sometimes people are like, oh, well, maybe he has a drinking problem. And so finally, like I finally, we eliminated that as a cause. And she was just like, you don't have a doctor here yet. These test results are, troubling, and you should go to the ER. So I I went home and I slept that night. I was so tired. I hadn't slept in like 3 nights that even with the itching, I passed out. And at like 6 o'clock the next morning, and I'm going to say this is February of 2021 at this point, I show up to the ER, and that is the beginning of the journey in earnest. They admit me to the hospital. They run some more blood tests to see, what's going on with the liver enzymes. I think I have a CT. No, I don't have a CT yet. They give me an ultrasound. Eventually, they give me an endoscopic ultrasound, but yeah, they found that there was a stricture in my bile duct. So I feel like all this whole story has been leading to a short science lesson. Your liver produces bile. It's a digestive enzyme. It goes through, gets stored in your gallbladder and then released into your small intestine to digest fats and other foods. And that that the tube that brings the bile down goes through the head of your pancreas. So that tube had a stricture in it, means that it was closed off. When bile can't be distributed in the regular fashion, as your body normally does in your digestive tract, you like end up depositing it in your blood, in your flesh. And that is the cause of the jaundice and the elevated liver enzymes. There was no sense of urgency. This was like I was an otherwise healthy person with a history of colitis. They were not thinking that this was anything scary. They told me to come back in a few weeks and I would have another endoscopy, and they would remove the stent. And that happened. And they removed the stent, and the symptoms came back. And then they decided that it was my gallbladder. And this is common. It's very common for pancreatic cancer to be for people to assume that it's a gallbladder issue. So they decide that I'm going to have my gallbladder out. It was late April, and I went to my GI's office. She's the endoscopist. She basically was like, I don't know what's happening here, but you for sure don't have cancer. We have done so many brushings, and they had at this point. She said to me, you definitely don't have cancer. If you have cancer, I will roll over in my grave. So I left the GI's office feeling pretty confident. And then 3 hours later, I got an automatic notification on my phone from my chart that said that I had tested, that one of my cytology reports had come back and it said adenocarcinoma on it. And I didn't know what that meant. But my line is that scary, your cancer words sound like the bad guy from Star Wars. Like they have, you don't know exactly what adenocarcinoma meant. Well, I didn't at least, but I knew it wasn't good. And I sat with that for about 2 hours. And then the surgical oncologist who did my gallbladder surgery, he called me on the phone. And to his credit, he got this case referred back to him. He was when they saw those results, they just automatically referred it back to him. He was at a conference or something out of town, and he called me on his personal cell phone and apologized to me because he knew, I told him, this lady, she told me I definitely did not have cancer earlier, and now I do. And, I was freaked out. My surgeon is really the salt of the earth. He calmed me down. He told me, I don't know if he remembers it this way, but I'll never forget this conversation. He said, if this is cancer, it's a very small tumor, and I should be able to get this. I'm confident. The area that they found the adenocarcinoma in is called the ampulla of Vader. Everything in the body, in this part of the body, is pretty small and overlapping. And so pancreatic cancer could be an explanation, but given my age and, let's face it, the taboo around death, no one was talking about that. The doctor told me when pressed, he told me ampullary cancer, which has a higher survival rate and is still incredibly rare for someone my age, but is less rare than pancreatic cancer in the same age category. In any case, because of this part of the body, the size and the layout of this part of the body, they do the same surgery, the Whipple, the pancreatoduodenectomy, for ampullary cancer as they do for pancreatic cancer. So basically, they remove the plan, and this was 5 days after the phone call. I was in his office, and he was like, okay, I'm going to remove, part of your pancreas, part of your small intestine. I'd just come out of surgery. I'm a little stoned. So I wasn't freaking out or anything. But I was mindful that, this is weird. I don't think it's late enough. And the, in a, after a while, my surgeon comes in and he gives me the news. He tells me that, contrary to what they thought, they cut me open and they found a tumor on the head of my pancreas that had spread outside of the pancreas. So metastatic pancreatic cancer is considered inoperable. And so when they saw that, they closed me up. And yeah, when he told me that, I was stoned, but I knew enough to know what he was telling me. But he told me, he was like, well, because of your age and because they suspect that I'm at this point, a BRCA2 mutation carrier, because my sister is, for sure, and my mother had died of breast cancer, although she was not a BRCA person. In any case, the surgeon was like, I'm pretty sure, we have to confirm with genetic tests, but I'm pretty sure you have this particular genetic abnormality. And if that is the case, then there are targeted therapies that might work for you. He said, this is a mean cancer. I always like how thoughtful and judicious people apply metaphors to cancer. He said mean. I like mean. I like difficult. Those are, I think, good metaphors. He said, it's a mean cancer, but I think because of your particular situation, after treatment, we might be able in a year to, try the surgery again. Because for pancreatic cancer, the surgery is the only long-term solution, that's the only long-term survival solution. Chemotherapy, radiation are not curative. They are life extending. So he was pretty confident, at least, in the context of a lethal diagnosis. He introduced me later that day to my oncologist, and my oncologist was not as confident. When pressed, he was like, with treatment, you might have 1 to 3 good years left, but that's really it. And they this was the beginning of May 2021. My wound had to heal, but 3 weeks later, the end of, I think it was May 27th, 2021, I started chemotherapy. It's, like a lot of other people with metastatic pancreatic cancer, I was given a cocktail called FOLFIRINOX, which is like 5 different things, and it's awful. It having done other chemo cocktails, I mean, it's all awful, right? It all sucks. But FOLFIRINOX was really, really abrasive. And my first scan after 3 months of FOLFIRINOX, the oncologist said, well, your tumor shrank a little bit, but you can tell from the way he's telling me that, it could just be imaging error, right? Like it's such a minute retreat that it's like barely perceptible. And then 3 months later, my next scan, my next CT and MRI, it had actually grown, it had metastasized to my liver. So things were not looking good. At this point, I was not confident that I would be some special case, some, kind of miracle. I just thought, this is it. But my oncologist switched me to a different chemotherapy cocktail. And I should say, I was honestly relieved, because after almost 6 months on FOLFIRINOX, in fact, it was that day that the neuropathy had gotten so bad that I couldn't get out of a chair by myself. Like I needed my friend to hoist me up. And I was pretty thin at this point. And it was miserable. So when he told me it's not working, you don't have to do it today, I was very thankful. He told me that I can't remember how my oncologist phrased it, but he told me that there was a cocktail that some doctors or researchers had found was promising for people in my situation. So I think it was young people, like AYA folks, but it may have also been AYA folks with pancreatic cancer who also are BRCA mutation carriers. And it was a cocktail of gemcitabine, Braxine, and cisplatin. And honestly, it was like, my quality of life was improved dramatically. I'm happy to say. By the time my first set of scans came around 3 months in, some of the spots on my liver had started to disappear. So I do three more months of chemo, and it's honestly like I made it through chemo. Like I didn't lose my hair, and I maintained a pretty, like I'm 6 feet tall. I was 215 when I was diagnosed. I maintained a healthy weight through this cocktail miraculously. I'm very thankful for it, because it made, at this point I thought I was still dying, sooner rather than later. So I was trying to have fun. But in March of 2021, 3 months later, he looked at my scans and he was like, yeah, I can't, like outside of the tumor, they were not, if memory serves, they could not identify cancer outside of the tumor. So almost a year to the day, in fact, they attempted another Whipple, and this time it was successful. And it was not just like, it was not a little successful. It was not like, oh, we bought him, there's some cancer over here, but like we bought him some time. Like all of my, I'm not a doctor, so the medical parlance kind of escapes me, but when Dr. Allen came into my hospital room to tell me, he said it was all dead. The tumor, I believe, is how he described it. He said, and again, I was, on Dilaudid, so take this with for what it's worth. But he said that the tumor, I think he said dead, and that all of my margins were good, and all of the lymph nodes they tested were negative. So I got really something I did not expect. At this point, before this, they couldn't see any cancer on the CT or MRI, but that didn't mean that my peritoneum wasn't covered in cancer. That just meant that they wouldn't be able to tell until they got in there. And when they got in there, they were pleasantly surprised that things had worked. This last scan was a lot smoother than others have been, but it's incredibly difficult. But for those of you watching at home, the chances of me living out those 6 years are astronomically small. Pancreatic cancer has a remarkably low 5-year survival rate. And I mean, gosh, there was news this year that the survival rate of PC, pancreatic adenocarcinoma, increased to 13% or something like that. So it's unlikely that I will see all of that time, at least on paper. I think it's important to remember that if you can take anything from my story, it's that you are not the statistic. You really are not. And, I was diagnosed with something I wasn't supposed to have at my age. Very unlikely. And then when I, had that unlikely thing, it was supposed to kill me, and I didn't die. And so, in a sense, I beat the odds not once, but twice. And so, if you're going to believe someone on the "you are not your statistics" front, it should be me. I'm just gonna lay that claim. I've been without evidence of recurrent metastatic disease in my body for 18 months. It's important to remember that you're not the statistic. I think that's one takeaway. Another takeaway is that treatment is not linear. Pancreatic cancer is often thought of in linear terms as a quick, short trajectory to death. And our assumption is that if treatment is going to work, it works immediately, and that you don't take one step back and one step forward. And that's just, in my experience, not true. Sometimes things get worse before they get better. And it's not reason to lose heart. Have the drink, eat the cheeseburger, live your life, to the extent that you can. That's how I lived.